Hello, welcome to Post Colonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and today I'll briefly talk about a concept that comes out every now and then. People use it, and it is the decentered subject. And most of the time it is connected to postmodern thought or postmodernity. And people usually refer to it, but no one really unpacks it. So the purpose here is to simply, without delving into deep historical and philosophical details of it, explain the term the decentered subject. So in order to understand the concept of the decentered subject, right, we first need a clear understanding of what we mean by a subject, then how human subjects were defined, let's say in classical philosophy or in post-Renaissance philosophy and in Romanticism, right? And I'm relying heavily on the European and then the British tradition. So I already have a video on the subject, right? Simply stated, a subject is anyone, any human being capable of autonomous action. Anyone who can perform an action, has a certain degree of agency. We consider that person a subject. Now, in certain cases, you have to achieve subjecthood, and so many of the debates in post-colonial studies are about that, as to how do the natives achieve subjecthood because they are objectified and reduced to the level of objects, right? But if you go by Louis Althusser's discussion of ideology and subjecthood, we already know, according to him, that we are inherently all born as subjects. We have a last name, we have a cultural and social identity. We don't have to become subjects. We make our subjecthood through ideology, right? But by and large, the main concern even in modernism is that human beings are autonomous subjects capable of rational thought, capable of making their own decisions, and that somehow this stems from within. That is what we call humanism, this essential humanism that gives us a certain tendency to produce things, enjoy work, enjoy art. Even Marx is fairly Hegelian in his sense, because this idea of the subject comes from Hegel. Not necessarily comes from Hegel, but people rely on him. But the idea of a centered subject is a subject autonomous onto his or herself, capable of these inner qualities that are centered, right, and that can enable a person to perform a stable identity in the world, right? Now, the concept of the decentered subject, it's very complicated, but it needs certain building blocks. So the first major building block, of course, was the Saussurian linguistics, right? I have a video on that as well. So the assumption, one of the assumptions in Saussurian linguistics, other than that language works as a system, right, and all that, was that the sign means something through its difference from other signs. That means the sign has no substantial meaning, and meaning is hence transferred to its other, right? So meaning is differential. Now that's a beginning block of the decentered subject. Because if the sign, on the level of the sign, the meaning resides outside of the sign, then coming to the human and our subjectivity, we can't be like Descartes and go into a little cabin in the Alps and think ourselves through. Our self is always with reference to the world, to others. That means part of it is determined not from inside, but through others, right? Famously, Mikhail Bakhtin would say is that self is the gift, is a bridge thrown across through the gaze of the other, right? So the moment we buy into this idea that there is nothing inherently human or subjecthood about us, and that it comes from outside, can be determined by outside forces, right? And it can sometimes be over-determined. Then we are in the realm of the decentered subject. I think the biggest influence in this would be Foucault. Michel Foucault's work constantly, and you can even watch my video on what is an author, and this is very much in play there. Because Foucault is a theorist of discourse, and discourse, of course, is a body of knowledge with its experts, its prestigious institutions, but it has the power to determine who we are, how we see the world, how we live a life in it. Then so much of what we do as human beings becomes over-determined by the discourses within which we live. And if that is how we are over-determined, then we are no longer a centered, autonomous subject. We perform what Foucault calls subject effects, but we are a decentered subject. Now, another thing in postmodernism, and I'm reducing very complex debates over here, is the concept of the decentered subject as the other of Europe, right? So traditionally, the Europeans imagined their own reality and their own idea of subjecthood as central and universal, right? And within that, males and men did that. So that becomes decentered when women enter the public sphere, when they start claiming part of the public sphere. Similarly, within the colonial context, when the natives become politically active, become agential, and claim the public sphere partially or fully, then the subject of Europe is decentered, right? Because there are more people previously not included as subjects who are claiming full humanity. So overall, a decentered subject then is a subject that isn't essential, isn't determined from within, and is not a complete self unto itself, but depends on so many things outside of it to be taken fully, right? And to be assumed to be a fully realized human being, a fully realized subject, right? So when you bring in the social, the discursive, the political, the ideological, all at play in construction of human self, then you are dealing with a decentered subject, a subject that's not coming from within, but from forces larger than his or herself. That roughly is my understanding of the concept of the decentered subject. Now, if you read texts on postmodernism, I highly recommend it. You know, there is a concept that they theorized, and I had previously created a video on it, which was called the constitutive otherness, which also relies on Saussurean linguistics and the differential sign. And the idea of the constitutive otherness means that what is outside of us, what is not part of us in so many ways, determines who we are, right? So we know ourselves not as we ourselves, but in difference from others. So that means that other that we have imagined against whom we are defining our public self constitutes us, right? And that also is another permutation of the decentered subject. So overall, these are some of my thoughts. Now remember, the decentered subject then also gets connected to what we call post-humanism, anti-humanism. All of those terms are related to this idea that the subject is not essential and that it's broadly over-determined sometimes by forces outside of it, which could be ideology, which could be differences from others, and which could be a discourse. So these are some of my thoughts on it. I hope these are useful to you. Just let me know what you think, and if you have any other questions that I might have the ability to answer, I'll be happy to answer those questions. I hope you all are staying safe and taking care of each other. Please continue to do so, and I will now see you next time. Until then, as always, peace and love.